I kissed an alpha by mistake the next day. One wolf appeared in my castle, and I became Alpha Queen. I never believed in fate until the night I kissed a stranger in the rose garden and felt my soul recognize its other half, only to discover he wore another woman's mark on his neck. The corset was killing me. Not metaphorically, not dramatically, literally stealing the air from my lungs with each shallow breath I managed to drag past the whalebone prison cinching my ribs. I stood in front of the gilt-edged mirror in my chambers, watching my lady's maid Charlotte pull the laces tighter, tighter, until black spots danced at the edges of my vision. This was what it meant to be an Omega princess in 1544. Beauty equaled suffering. Obedience equaled survival. And tonight, at the Moon Goddess Festival Masquerade Ball, I was expected to be both beautiful and obedient, while my father paraded me before Duke Edmund Morrison like a broodmare at auction. The Duke was 63 years old. I had just turned 26. He had buried 3 wives already, none of them living past 30, and the entire Carter territory whispered about what happened behind the closed doors of his estate. But my father, Lord William Carter, didn't care about whispers. He cared about alliances. He cared about the Duke's vast iron mines and shipping contracts. He cared about everything, except whether his only daughter wanted to spend her life shackled to a man old enough to be her grandfather. "You're pale, my lady," Charlotte murmured, her fingers gentle as she adjusted the pearl-encrusted bodice of my gown, ice blue silk that matched my eyes, chosen specifically by my father to make me look virginal and desirable. I wanted to laugh at the contradiction, but I couldn't spare the breath. "I can't breathe," I whispered. "You'll adjust." "You always do." Her tone was sympathetic, but we both knew the truth. This was just the beginning. If I married the Duke, I'd spend the rest of my life adjusting to his touch, his demands, his inevitable cruelties. The corset was practice for the cage that would become my existence. I pressed my hand against my stomach, feeling my wolf stir restlessly beneath my skin. She hated this, hated the confinement, the performance, the lie we were living. Omegas were supposed to be gentle, submissive, grateful for whatever Alpha claimed them, but my wolf was none of those things. She was wild and furious, pacing inside me like a prisoner planning escape. "Your father is waiting in the great hall," Charlotte said softly, stepping back to survey her work. "You look perfect." Perfect. The word tasted like ashes. I looked like a painted doll, a pretty thing designed to be sold to the highest bidder. The only imperfection was my eyes, too bright, too angry, revealing everything I was supposed to hide. I descended the stone staircase carefully, my heavy skirts whispering against the steps. The castle was over 200 years old, built by my ancestors when they first claimed this territory in the Virginia wilderness. Every stone held memories of stronger women than me, warriors, leaders, queens, who had fought for their power instead of having it stripped away. I wondered what they would think of me now, walking toward my own execution in silk and pearls. My father stood at the bottom of the stairs, his alpha presence filling the space like a physical force, tall, broad-shouldered, with iron-gray hair and eyes like winter steel. Once, when I was a child, I had thought him invincible. Now I knew the truth. He was just a man terrified of losing power, willing to sacrifice his daughter to keep it. "Madison." His voice was clipped, professional. He hadn't called me by a term of endearment in years. "You remember what we discussed?" It wasn't a question. "Yes, father." Smile, be charming, accept the Duke's attentions graciously. And he stepped closer, his scent, pine and smoke and authority, overwhelming my senses. This was an alpha's power, the ability to dominate through presence alone. My Omega instinct screamed at me to lower my eyes, to submit, to obey. I met his gaze instead, and accept his proposal when he makes it. Something dangerous flickered in his expression. "Your mother would have wanted this for you. Security, status. My mother had died when I was 12, and I was certain she would have wanted nothing of the sort. She had loved my father once, truly loved him, before their political marriage had ground that love into duty and resentment. I had watched her fade year by year, her light dimming until there was nothing left but a ghost in expensive gowns. I would not become her, but I couldn't say that. Not yet. So I simply nodded, and watched satisfaction replace the danger in my father's eyes. The carriage ride to the Montgomery estate, where the festival was being held, took 30 minutes through dense forest roads. I spent every second planning my escape. Not from the territory, not yet. Just from the ballroom. from the Duke's clammy hands and predatory smile, from the weight of expectations that threatened to crush me more effectively than any corset. The Moon Goddess Festival was sacred, a celebration of the ancient magic that bound our kind to the lunar cycles and the mate bonds that shaped our destinies. Ironic that my father would use this holy night to sell me into a loveless marriage. But then again, powerful men had been perverting sacred things for centuries. Why should tonight be different? The Montgomery estate blazed with light, hundreds of candles and torches turning the massive stone manor into something from a fairy tale. Carriages lined the circular drive, nobles from every nearby territory gathering for the most important social event of the year. Everyone wore masks, elaborate confections of feathers, jewels, and silk that concealed identities and encouraged secrets. For one night, class and status could be forgotten. For one night, we could pretend to be anyone. I adjusted my own mask, a delicate thing of silver filigree and white feathers that covered the upper half of my face, and felt something dangerous unfurl in my chest. Hope. Reckless, foolish hope that maybe, just maybe, I could steal a few hours of freedom before my cage door locked forever. The ballroom was magnificent. Vaulted ceilings painted with scenes of the moon goddess blessing her children, crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across the marble floors, and hundreds of masked nobles swirling in elaborate dances. Music swelled from the orchestra, violins and cellos weaving together in a haunting melody that seemed to bypass my ears entirely and resonate directly in my bones. My father's hand clamped around my elbow. There, by the refreshment table, the Duke. I forced myself to look. Duke Morrison stood surrounded by fawning courtiers, his mask doing nothing to hide his age or the cruel set of his mouth. When he saw me, his lips curved into something that might have been a smile on a younger, kinder man. On him, it looked like a predator spotting prey. "Go," my father commanded, releasing my arm. "Make yourself agreeable." I moved through the crowd like a sleepwalker, my body operating on autopilot while my mind screamed. This was it, the moment I had been dreading for months. Once the Duke claimed me publicly, once he made his intentions known to the assembled nobility, there would be no escape. An Omega did not refuse an Alpha of his status. An Omega did not disgrace her family. An Omega did not. I turned sharply, ducking behind a column, my heart hammering against my ribs. I couldn't do it. Not yet. I just needed a moment, just one moment to breathe without feeling like I was drowning. The gardens. I could see them through the tall windows, shadowed and moonlit and blessedly empty. Without thinking, without planning, I slipped through the nearest door and into the cool night air. The scent hit me first. Roses. Thousands of them. Their perfume so thick it was almost visible in the silver moonlight. The Montgomery estate was famous for its rose garden, acre upon acre of carefully cultivated blooms that attracted nobles and common folk alike during the day. At night, with the moon full and heavy overhead, it felt like stepping into another world, a secret world where the rules didn't apply. I walked deeper into the garden, following winding paths between massive bushes heavy with flowers, white roses, red roses, pink and yellow, and every shade between. The sound of the ballroom faded behind me until there was nothing but crickets and the whisper of my skirts against the gravel path. My lungs expanded fully for the first time in hours, and I pulled off my mask, tilting my face toward the moon. Running away, I spun, my hand flying to my throat, and found myself facing a man in a midnight blue mask decorated with silver stars. He stood at the intersection of two paths, his posture relaxed but alert, like a wolf at rest who could spring into motion in an instant. Alpha. The power rolled off him in waves, but it felt different from my father's crushing dominance. This was warmer, more controlled, threaded through with something I couldn't quite name. Hiding, I corrected, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. The mask still covered his face and mine lay in my hand, but somehow the darkness and distance made me brave. There's a difference. He moved closer, and I caught his scent. Cedarwood and night air and something wild, something that made my wolf lift her head with interest for the first time in years. Is there? Both involve avoidance. Both are temporary solutions to permanent problems. You sound like you're speaking from experience. Maybe I am. He was close enough now that I could see his eyes through the mask. Dark, intelligent, sad, in a way that suggested he understood exactly what I was running from. What are you hiding from? The truth spilled out before I could stop it. A marriage I don't want. A future I can't escape. My father's disappointment and my own cowardice. That's not cowardice. His voice was gentle, and somehow that gentleness hurt more than cruelty would have. That's survival. Is it? Because it feels like dying slowly. He was silent for a long moment, and I realized I had said too much, revealed too much to this stranger in the moonlight. But instead of mocking me or offering empty platitudes, he simply said, "I understand." And somehow, I believed him. We stood there in the rose garden, two masked strangers sharing the weight of our gilded cages, and I felt something shift, a connection, tenuous and inexplicable, stretching between us like a golden thread. My wolf whined softly, pressing against my skin as if trying to get closer to him. "Dance with me," he said suddenly. No ballroom, no witnesses, no expectations, just two people stealing a moment of freedom. I should have said no. Should have remembered my duty, my father's commands, the Duke waiting inside. But the moon was full, and the roses smelled like rebellion, and this stranger's eyes held a loneliness that matched my own. "Yes," I whispered. He took my hand, and the world caught fire. The moment his skin touched mine, electricity shot up my arm and straight to my heart. My wolf surged forward with a force that nearly drove me to my knees, howling with recognition, with desperate need, with something I didn't have a name for. His eyes widened behind the mask, and I knew he felt it too. This impossible, undeniable pull between us. "What?" I started, but he was already moving, his other hand settling at my waist, pulling me into a dance position even as his fingers trembled against my silk-covered ribs. We moved together like we had been dancing for years, like our bodies knew steps our minds had never learned. There was no music, except the wind in the roses and the wild beating of my heart, but it was enough, more than enough. Every place he touched me burned. Every breath we shared tasted like coming home. "Who are you?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. As long as we were masked strangers, this could be perfect. Real names would bring reality crashing back. "Someone who shouldn't be here," he answered, his voice rough. "Someone who should have stayed away." "Then why didn't you?" His hand tightened on my waist, pulling me closer until I could feel the heat of him through the layers of fabric separating us. "Because I couldn't. Because the moment I saw you standing there in the moonlight, He stopped, swallowed hard, and I watched his throat work with emotions he couldn't name. I felt them too. This desperate, terrifying certainty that something monumental was happening, that the universe was rearranging itself around us, that nothing would ever be the same. We stopped dancing, but we didn't let go, couldn't let go. His forehead dropped to mine, and I breathed him in, that cedarwood scent now mixed with something uniquely him, something that made my mouth water and my wolf howl with desperate longing. "This is impossible," he whispered. "I know. We can't. I know." But we were already moving, already closing the distance, already surrendering to whatever this was. His hand came up to cup my face, thumb brushing my cheekbone with devastating gentleness. My own hands fisted in his jacket, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a world gone liquid and strange. When his lips touched mine, the universe exploded. Lightning struck through my veins, white-hot and merciless. My wolf threw her head back and howled in triumph, recognizing something my human mind couldn't comprehend. The mate bond, the sacred, unbreakable connection blessed by the moon goddess herself, slammed into place with the force of destiny itself. Golden light burst behind my closed eyelids, and I tasted eternity in his kiss, felt my soul recognizing its other half, its missing piece, its home. He gasped against my mouth, his whole body shuddering, and I knew he felt it too. The bond singing between us, golden and perfect and absolutely, catastrophically wrong. Because mate bonds didn't make mistakes. The moon goddess didn't give you your fated mate unless they were free to claim. Unless we broke apart, stumbling backward, my hand flying to my mouth. In the chaos of the kiss, his mask had shifted, and moonlight illuminated his face clearly for the first time. Blake Harrison, Lord of the Harrison Territory, alpha of one of the most powerful packs in Virginia, married alpha. "No," I whispered, my voice breaking on the word. "No, no, no." His own hand reached up, fingers trembling as they touched his lips like he could still feel the kiss burning there. His mask had fallen completely, and I watched recognition dawn in his dark eyes as he saw my face fully for the first time. "Madison Carter," he breathed, and my name in his voice sounded like a prayer and a curse and a mourning song all at once. We stared at each other, the mate bond thrumming between us like a living thing. golden and perfect and poisonous. Because he was married, 8 years married to Rachel Montgomery, a political alliance that kept peace between their territories. He wore her mark on his neck, faint but visible, the scar where she had bitten him during their bonding ceremony. "I have a wife," he said, the words seeming to tear out of him. "I have a wife and you're, oh gods, what have we done?" The Bond was screaming now, my wolf clawing at my insides, demanding I claim what was mine. But he wasn't mine. He belonged to someone else. The moon goddess had made a mistake, had given me a mate I could never have, had lit a fire that would burn us both to ashes. "I have to go," I choked out, backing away even as every cell in my body shrieked in protest. "I have to. This was a mistake. This was... Madison? Wait." But I was already running, gathering my skirts and shaking hands and fleeing through the rose garden like all the demons of hell were chasing me. And maybe they were. Maybe I was the demon, the other woman, the homewrecker who had kissed a married man and felt her soul complete for the first time in her life. I didn't go back to the ballroom. Couldn't face my father, the Duke, the questions. I found Charlotte near the carriages and ordered her to take me home immediately. She took one look at my face and obeyed without question. The ride back to Carter Castle passed in a blur. My whole body felt like it was vibrating. The mate bond pulled taut between us even as distance increased. I could feel him, feel his anguish, his confusion, his desire and self-hatred warring inside him. The connection was that strong, that immediate, that devastating. This couldn't be happening. The moon goddess didn't make mistakes. She didn't give mated alphas new mate bonds. She didn't destroy marriages and break sacred vows. But she had. And I was left holding the shattered pieces of a destiny I never asked for. I made it to my chambers before I collapsed, sinking onto the floor in a puddle of ice-blue silk, my hand pressed against my mouth where his kiss still burned. My wolf was howling, a sound of such primal anguish that I wondered if it would ever stop. Charlotte tried to help me undress, but I waved her away. "Leave me, please. I just need to be alone." She hesitated, her eyes worried, but finally nodded and withdrew. The moment the door closed, I let the tears come. Great, gasping sobs that shook my whole body, mourning for a future I would never have, for a mate I couldn't claim, for the cosmic joke of being given everything I ever wanted in a form I could never keep. I don't know how long I cried. Long enough for the moon to shift in the sky, long enough for the mate bond to settle from screaming agony to a constant throbbing ache, long enough to understand that this wasn't going away. This bond, this connection, this devastating certainty that Blake Harrison was mine and I was his. It was permanent, eternal, blessed by the goddess herself, and completely, utterly impossible. Eventually, I managed to strip off the gown and corset, to wash my face and braid my hair with shaking hands. I climbed into bed, but sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt him, felt his presence like a second heartbeat, felt his turmoil matching my own. The bond was a golden thread connecting us, stretching across the miles between our territories, unbreakable and unwanted. Dawn was breaking when Charlotte knocked softly on my door. I hadn't slept at all, but I called for her to enter anyway, expecting breakfast or morning pleasantries. Instead, her face was pale, her hands twisting in her apron. "My lady, there's someone here to see you." She arrived at first light, alone, demanding an audience. "Your father is still asleep," but she said it was urgent. My blood turned to ice. Who? But I already knew. Could feel it through the bond. The presence of the one person who had every right to hate me, to destroy me, to see me punished for what I'd done. "Lady Rachel Montgomery," Charlotte whispered. "Lord Harrison's wife. She's waiting in the solar, my lady. She says she'll only speak to you. Alone." The mate bond flared with Blake's panic, his awareness that his wife had come here, that she knew. And underneath that panic, I felt something else, something that felt almost like relief. I dressed quickly in a simple morning gown, my hands steadier than they should have been. There was no point in delaying this, no point in hiding. Rachel Montgomery had come to confront the woman who had kissed her husband, and I would face her with whatever dignity I had left. The walk to the solar felt like walking to my execution, every step measured, every breath counted, knowing that on the other side of that door waited judgment and consequences, and the end of whatever fragile hope I'd been clinging to. I pushed open the door. Rachel Montgomery stood by the window, backlit by the rising sun, her blonde hair catching the light like a halo. She was beautiful. Everyone knew that. with the kind of classical features that painters loved and poets wrote sonnets about. But it was her eyes that struck me, red-rimmed, exhausted, and filled not with rage but with something that looked disturbingly like understanding. "Lady Madison," she said softly, and her voice held no accusation, no venom, just bone-deep weariness. "We need to talk. About your mate, about my husband, and about the impossible situation the moon goddess has trapped us all in." My knees went weak, because she didn't sound angry. She sounded sympathetic, and somehow, that was more terrifying than any rage could have been. "You felt it," I whispered, not a question. "Through your bond with him. You felt when he... Yes." She turned to face me fully, and I saw tears tracking down her perfect cheeks. "I felt it. I felt the exact moment my husband's soul recognized yours. And do you know what I felt right after that, Lady Madison? What I felt underlying all his shock and guilt and desire?" I shook my head, unable to speak. Rachel's smile was sad and small and devastating. "Relief. I felt his relief, because 3 years ago I met my true mate too, and we've been suffering in silence ever since, honoring vows that should never have been made. So no, I'm not here to destroy you. I'm here because I hope, you might be the answer we've all been praying for." The world tilted sideways. Rachel Montgomery had a secret mate, Blake's wife, the woman I'd been prepared to hate, to fear, to see as my enemy. She was trapped in the same hell, bound by the same impossible rules. And somewhere, miles away, I felt Blake's presence through the bond, his shock and hope and terror mirroring my own, as he realized his wife hadn't come to condemn me. She'd come to save us all. I stood frozen in the doorway of the solar, my heart hammering so violently I thought it might crack my ribs, staring at the woman who should have been my enemy and hearing words that made no sense. Rachel Montgomery, Lady Rachel Harrison, I corrected myself bitterly, was not here to destroy me. She was here because she had a secret mate too. The impossibility of it stole my breath more effectively than any corset ever had. "You have a mate," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "A true mate. Not Blake. Not Blake," she confirmed. And the way she said his name, with affection but no passion, with respect but no longing, told me everything I needed to know about their 8-year marriage. "His name is James Whitmore. He's a beta advisor in my household. And for 3 years, we've been living a lie, honoring vows that never should have been made, dying slowly while the mate bond begs us to claim each other." She moved away from the window, and I saw her fully for the first time. Beautiful, yes, but exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep, and everything to do with living half a life. Her green eyes held shadows that matched my own, and her hands trembled slightly as she gestured to the chairs by the empty fireplace. "Please sit. This conversation will be easier if we're not standing like we're about to duel." I shouldn't have obeyed. Should have demanded answers, explanations, should have protected myself against whatever trap this might be. But something in her voice, that bone-deep weariness, that understanding, made me trust her in a way that defied logic. I crossed the room and sank into one of the velvet chairs, my morning gown pooling around me like water. Rachel sat across from me, her posture perfect despite her obvious exhaustion. Years of training, I thought. Years of being the perfect lady, the perfect wife, the perfect lie. I understood that in my bones. "I don't understand," I said finally, my hands twisted in my lap. "The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes. If you and Blake aren't true mates, why did you marry at all? Why go through with a bonding ceremony?" "Because 8 years ago, the Harrison and Montgomery territories were on the brink of war." Her voice was steady, matter of fact, reciting history like a schoolteacher. "My father and Blake's father arranged our marriage to create peace. We were both young. I was 18, Blake was 24, and we believed what we were told. That duty mattered more than destiny. That mate bonds were rare, possibly mythical. That we could build something real through commitment and respect. But you couldn't. We tried." A sad smile flickered across her face. "We genuinely tried. Blake is a good man, Madison. He was kind to me, never cruel, never forced himself on me. We consummated the marriage because that was expected, and I bit his neck during the ceremony to seal our political bond, but it was empty. Like going through the motions of a dance you've never learned, hitting all the right steps but feeling nothing. I felt Blake through our mate bond, his awareness that we were talking about him. his complicated emotions churning like storm clouds on the horizon. Guilt, yes, but also something that felt like vindication. Like he'd spent years wondering if something was wrong with him for not loving his wife, and now he had proof that the lack wasn't his failure. It was the moon goddess's truth. "And then you met James," I prompted, needing to understand the full scope of this impossible situation. Rachel's entire face transformed. The exhaustion remained, but underneath it bloomed something beautiful and aching. Love, pure and desperate and denied. 3 years ago, he came to us from the Western Territories, seeking asylum after his pack was destroyed by human raiders. Blake hired him as an advisor because James is brilliant with trade negotiations and territorial law. I met him in the library one afternoon, and the moment our eyes met, she broke off, pressing her hand to her heart like she could physically contain the pain. It was like lightning, Madison. Like my soul had been wandering in darkness for my entire life and suddenly found light. My wolf recognized him instantly, howled for him, demanded I claim him right there surrounded by law books and ancient treaties. But I was married. Blake was my husband. And James is a beta. No pack, no territory, no power. Claiming him would have destroyed everything. "So you did nothing." "We did nothing," she agreed, and the self-loathing in her voice was visceral. "For 3 years, we've lived in the same house, worked together, brushed past each other in hallways, and pretended we don't feel the bond screaming between us. Blake knows, of course. You can't hide that kind of agony from someone you live with. But he never said anything, never demanded I give James up, because he understood. He was living the same half-life I was. The solar was silent except for our breathing, and the distant sound of servants moving through the castle. Morning light poured through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny galaxies, and I felt the weight of our collective prison settling over us like grave dirt. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally. "You could have kept your secret, could have hated me for threatening your marriage. Instead, you rode here alone at dawn to confess everything. Why?" Rachel leaned forward, her green eyes intense and desperate. "Because last night, when Blake's mate bond ignited, I felt it through our political bond, felt his shock, his desire, his absolute certainty that he'd found his other half. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt hope. Because if the moon goddess gave Blake a true mate, then maybe there's a way out of this for all of us. You want me to help you leave Blake," I said slowly, understanding crystallizing. "You want to use my bond with him as justification to—" "I want us to change everything," Rachel interrupted, her voice fierce with sudden passion. "Not just for us, for every wolf trapped in a loveless marriage, for every true mate separated by duty in law and tradition. The mate bond is sacred, Madison. It's the moon goddess's greatest gift, and we've spent centuries perverting it, ignoring it, sacrificing it on the altar of politics and power. What if we stopped? They'd never allow it. The councils, the territories, they'd what? Punish us? Exile us? They're already killing us slowly." Rachel's hands clenched into fists in her lap. "Blake and I have given 8 years to a marriage neither of us wanted. James has spent 3 years watching his mate belong to another man. And you're being sold to Duke Morrison like property. When does it end, Madison? When do we say that our souls matter more than their politics?" I wanted to believe her. Gods. I wanted to believe that there was a way out, that the mate bond screaming through my veins for Blake wasn't a curse, but a catalyst. But I'd spent 26 years learning that wanting something didn't make it possible. "My father will never agree," I said quietly. "He needs the Duke's alliance, and Blake's territory. They depend on the peace your marriage brought. If you and Blake separate, if he claims me publicly, both territories could go to war. Or they could see that true mates make stronger alliances than political marriages ever could." Rachel stood abruptly, pacing to the window like she couldn't contain her restless energy. "Think about it. Blake and I produced no heirs in 8 years. The bond was too weak, too empty. But you and Blake, the true mate bond is fertile, Madison. You could give him children, strengthen his pack, create genuine loyalty instead of forced compliance." Heat flooded my face. I hadn't let myself think that far ahead, hadn't allowed my mind to imagine Blake's hands on me, his mark on my neck, his children growing inside me. The mate bond pulsed with approval at the thought, and I felt Blake's response echo through the connection, hunger and longing, and a fierce protectiveness that stole my breath. "And you? I managed. What happens to you if Blake claims me? I finally get to claim James. Her voice softened, filled with a hope so fragile it hurt to hear. I finally get to stop pretending, to build a real life instead of this beautiful cage. Before I could respond, the solar door crashed open. Blake stood in the doorway, his hair disheveled and his riding clothes dusty from hard travel. He must have ridden through the night, pushed his horse to the breaking point to get here. His dark eyes found mine first, and the mate bond flared so intensely I gasped, my hand flying to my chest. Then his gaze shifted to Rachel, and I watched complicated emotions chase across his face. Guilt, affection, apology, and underneath it all, desperate hope. "Rachel," he said, his voice rough, "you shouldn't have come here. If anyone saw you, if they realized, they'll realize eventually anyway," Rachel interrupted, moving toward him with the easy familiarity of 8 years together. Not lovers, but something else. Partners in suffering, allies in their shared cage. "We can't hide this, Blake. Madison is your true mate. The whole territory will know within days." "I know." He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture so human and vulnerable it made my heart ache. I felt it the moment our lips touched. The bond, the certainty, the absolute knowledge that she's mine and I'm hers. "But I'm married, Rachel. I made vows. I can't just—" "Can't what?" Rachel's voice was gentle but firm. "Can't choose happiness? Can't acknowledge what the moon goddess herself ordained? Blake, we've wasted 8 years on a marriage that was dead from the beginning. How many more are you willing to sacrifice?" He looked at her for a long moment, and I saw the weight of their history in that gaze. The attempts at love that never took root, the respect that could never become passion, the friendship forged in mutual loneliness. "I never meant to hurt you," he said quietly. "I know. And I never meant to trap you." Rachel reached out and took his hand, the gesture intimate but not romantic. "But we trapped each other anyway, and we've been too afraid to admit it. Until now." Blake's eyes found mine again, and the mate bond sang between us, that golden thread pulling taut with longing. "Madison, Gods, I don't even know what to say. This shouldn't have happened. You shouldn't have been in that garden. I shouldn't have touched you. But the moment I did, everything I thought I knew about myself, about my life, about what I wanted, it all became a lie." I stood on shaking legs, my hands pressed against my stomach to calm the churning there. "I'm betrothed. My father has promised me to Duke Morrison. The announcement will be made in 2 days." The growl that tore from Blake's throat was pure alpha fury, his eyes flashing gold as his wolf surged forward. "That bastard is 60 years old. He's buried 3 wives. You can't possibly—" "I have no choice!" The words burst out of me, all my fear and rage and helplessness exploding at once. "You think I want this? You think I haven't been screaming inside for months knowing what's coming? But I'm an Omega, Blake. A princess with no power, no options, no voice. My father controls everything. The land, the money, even the castle my mother left me is held in trust until I marry. And if I refuse the Duke, if I disgrace the family, my father will disown me. I'll have nothing. You'll have me." Blake crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping close enough that I could feel his heat, smell his cedarwood scent mixing with my own vanilla and moonflower. "You'll have the mate bond. You'll have my protection, my territory, everything I can give you. You're married," I whispered, even as every cell in my body screamed to close the distance between us, to feel his arms around me, to surrender to the bond pulling us together like gravity. "To the wrong woman," Rachel said quietly from behind him. "Blake, tell her what we discussed on the ride here." Blake's jaw clenched, and I watched him war with himself, duty versus desire, vows versus destiny. When he spoke, his voice was raw. "There's a precedent, ancient law from before the territories formed. If a true mate bond is proven, any prior marriage can be dissolved by mutual consent. It hasn't been invoked in over a century because the councils discourage it, but it's still on the books." Hope flickered in my chest, dangerous and fragile. "And you would invoke it? Dissolve your marriage publicly? If it meant claiming you? If it meant honoring what the moon goddess chose instead of what our fathers forced upon us?" His hand lifted, hovering near my face like he was afraid to touch me, afraid that one more contact would shatter what little control he had left. "Yes, I would burn down everything I've built for one real day with my true mate, instead of a lifetime of pretending." The solar door burst open for the second time, and my father's voice cracked through the room like a whip. "Get away from my daughter, Harrison." Lord William Carter stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 of his largest guards, his face mottled with rage. Behind him, I could see servants clustering in the hallway, their faces avid with gossip and scandal. This was it. The moment our impossible situation became public catastrophe. Blake moved instinctively, putting himself between me and my father, his alpha power flooding the room until the air felt thick with it. "Lord Carter, this isn't what it looks like. It looks like you're alone in a room with my daughter, while your wife," my father's furious gaze cut to Rachel, "stands by and watches. It looks like the scandal everyone is already whispering about is true, that you kissed Madison at the festival, that you're trying to steal her from her betrothed." "I'm not stealing anything," Blake said, his voice deadly calm. "She's my mate. The moon goddess herself ordained it. Whatever betrothal you've arranged is legally binding and will go forward as planned." My father's voice was ice and iron. "Madison will marry Duke Morrison in 2 days. Any interference from you or your territory will be considered an act of war." Through the mate bond, I felt Blake's wolf rising, felt his barely controlled fury and desperate need to protect me. He was seconds from doing something catastrophic, claiming me right here, challenging my father, starting the war Lord Carter had just threatened. "Blake, don't." Rachel's voice cut through the tension. "Violence will only prove them right." "She's mine," Blake snarled, his eyes flashing gold. "The mate bond is not legally recognized," my father interrupted coldly. "Marriages are contracts, Lord Harrison. Territorial agreements. You already have a wife. Madison already has a betrothed. Whatever mystical nonsense you think you felt changes nothing. It changes everything," I heard myself say, my voice stronger than I felt. All eyes turned to me, and I stepped out from behind Blake, facing my father with my chin raised. The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes. If Blake is my true mate, then the goddess has a cruel sense of humor, giving you a married man. My father's expression was merciless. "You will marry the Duke, Madison. You will fulfill your duty to this family and this territory. And if Lord Harrison continues this pursuit, I will have no choice but to declare his entire territory in breach of peace treaties. Is that what you want? War? Bloodshed? All because of one foolish kiss?" I felt Blake's protest building, felt Rachel's fear through the bond she shared with her husband, felt the weight of centuries of tradition and law crushing down on us. This was how they controlled us, how they broke spirits and enforced obedience, by making love itself an act of war. "You have 48 hours, my father continued, addressing Blake directly. 48 hours to return to your territory and publicly reject any claim on my daughter. If you do, this scandal dies. If you don't, I will take your defiance as a declaration of war and respond accordingly. And if I choose neither?" Blake's voice was soft, dangerous. "If I choose to invoke the ancient laws and dissolve my marriage to claim my true mate?" My father laughed, the sound bitter and cruel. "Then you'll do it without Madison." "Because she'll be Duchess Morrison by then, legally bound and bedded, and not even your precious moon goddess can undo that." The threat hung in the air like poison. 2 days, 48 hours until I was trapped in an irreversible marriage, until the Duke's mark was on my neck and his claim was consummated. The mate bond shuddered with horror, and I felt Blake's control crack at the edges. "You can't do this," Rachel said, stepping forward with surprising courage. "The mate bond is sacred." "The moon goddess. The moon goddess doesn't govern territories, Lady Harrison. Men do, and men require order, law, and the honoring of contracts." My father's gaze hardened. "I suggest you take your husband home and remind him of his own marital vows, before this situation escalates beyond repair." Guards moved into the room, their hands on their weapons, their message clear. "Leave, now, or blood will spill." Blake looked at me, and the agony in his eyes nearly broke me. Through the mate bond, I felt his wolf howling, felt his desperate need to fight, to claim, to defy every law and tradition to keep me. But he also felt my terror, my certainty that if he pushed now, people would die, war would come, and I would still end up trapped in the Duke's bed, only with the added weight of bloodshed on my conscience. "This isn't over," Blake said quietly, his gaze locked on mine. "I will find a way. I swear to you, Madison, I will find a way." "You have 48 hours, my father repeated coldly. "Use them wisely, or live with the consequences." Rachel took Blake's arm, gently but firmly guiding him toward the door. As they passed me, she leaned close and whispered, "Don't give up. We're going to fix this. All of us. Together." Oh, then they were gone, and I was left alone in the solar with my father and his guards, the morning sun streaming through the windows like nothing apocalyptic had just happened, like my world hadn't just shattered into pieces too small to gather. My father dismissed the guards with a curt gesture. When the door closed behind them, he turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not quite anger, not quite disappointment, something colder, more final. "You have disgraced this family," he said quietly. "Whatever happened between you and Lord Harrison at the festival, it ends now. You will stay in your chambers until the wedding. You will speak to no one, and you will marry Duke Morrison as arranged, or I will consider you no daughter of mine." "Father, please." "No." The word was absolute. "I have given you every advantage, Madison. Education, comfort, status, and you repay me with scandal and disobedience. The Duke is willing to overlook this humiliation, but his patience has limits, as does mine." He turned to leave, and I found my voice, desperate and furious. "You're selling me to a monster. You know what he did to his other wives. I know he'll control you," my father said without turning back, "which is more than I've managed to do. 2 days, Madison. Make your peace with it." The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed in my bones. I stood alone in the solar, surrounded by morning light and the ghosts of all the impossible conversations that had just happened, and felt the mate bond stretching across the miles toward Blake like a golden lifeline. Through it, I felt his rage and helplessness, felt Rachel's determination and fear, and underneath it all, I felt something else stirring. Not acceptance, not surrender, revolution, because Rachel had been right about one thing. This system that forced us into cages, that treated mate bonds like inconveniences and hearts like commodities, it was the enemy, not each other, not our fathers or the councils or even the Duke with his cold eyes and cruel history. The system that said we had no choice, and 48 hours suddenly felt less like a death sentence and more like a deadline. Time enough to change everything, or die trying. I spent those 48 hours locked in my chambers like a prisoner awaiting execution, and in that suffocating silence, I discovered something I hadn't known existed inside me. Not compliance, not acceptance, but a rage so pure and fierce it felt like swallowing fire. The mate bond with Blake thrummed constantly through my veins, his anguish bleeding into mine until I couldn't tell where his pain ended and my own began, and somewhere in that golden thread connecting our souls, I found my answer. If they were going to destroy me anyway, if they were going to rip away my choice and sell me to a monster, then I would burn their carefully constructed world to ashes before I let them put their chains on me. The morning of my wedding to Duke Morrison, I woke before dawn and dressed myself in the simplest gown I owned. No corset, no silk, just plain cotton that let me breathe, let me move, let me be something other than a decorative object waiting to be claimed. Charlotte found me as I was braiding my hair, her face pale with worry because she knew, everyone in the castle knew, that I hadn't once practiced my vows or shown any sign of the dutiful bride I was supposed to be. "My lady," she whispered, her hands twisting in her apron. "The Duke's carriage has arrived. Your father is waiting in the chapel. The guests. Tell my father I need to speak with him. Alone. In the chapel. Before the ceremony begins." My voice was steady, cold, nothing like the terrified girl who had fled the rose garden 3 nights ago. The mate bond pulsed with Blake's awareness, his sudden attention focused on me across the miles. I sent him everything I was feeling through that golden thread. "Wait. Trust me. This ends today." Charlotte's eyes widened, but she nodded and fled. I stood in my plain dress with my unbound hair and waited for the explosion I knew was coming. It took less than 5 minutes. My father burst into my chambers without knocking, his face purple with rage. "What is the meaning of this? You're not even dressed. The ceremony begins in 30 minutes. The Duke, I'm not marrying him." The words came out quiet, but absolute, and I watched my father's expression shift from anger to disbelief, to something that looked almost like fear, because he'd spent 26 years training me to obey, to submit, to be the perfect Omega daughter, and in that moment, he realized he'd failed, that somewhere beneath all that conditioning, I'd remained wild. "You will do your duty," he said, his alpha power flooding the room, trying to force my submission through sheer dominance. Once it would have worked. Once I would have lowered my eyes and bent my neck and surrendered, but the mate bond burned in my chest like a second sun, Blake's strength flowing through it, and my own wolf rose up with teeth bared and refused to bow. No, I met his eyes, held his gaze without flinching. I won't. You can drag me to that chapel. You can hold me down while the Duke puts his mark on me, but I will scream. I will fight. I will make such a scene that everyone in the territory will know this marriage is a rape, not a union. Is that what you want? For your precious alliance to be built on violence and force? You ungrateful. My father's hand rose, and for a moment I thought he would strike me. But even he had limits. Lines he wouldn't cross in front of witnesses. Charlotte still hovered in the doorway, her eyes huge, and servants crowded the hallway beyond. Whatever happened next would be witnessed, would be gossiped about, would become legend. I'm your daughter, I said softly, and something in my voice made him freeze. I'm your blood, the only piece of my mother you have left, and you're selling me to a man who killed his last 3 wives. What would she say, father? What would mother think of what you've become? I watched him flinch, watched the mention of my mother, the only woman he'd ever truly loved, crack something in his armor. For just a moment, I saw grief in his eyes, and regret, and the ghost of the man he'd been before politics and power consumed him. But then his face hardened again, and I knew I'd lost him. You have a choice, Madison. Marry the Duke and retain your place in this family, or refuse and be cast out with nothing. No title, no lands, no support. You'll be dead within a month. Then I'll die free. I pulled the signet ring from my finger, the Carter family crest, the symbol of my birthright, and held it out to him. I choose exile. I choose poverty. I choose anything except a life shackled to that monster. The silence that followed was absolute. Through the open door, I could hear servants gasping, could feel the shock rippling through the castle like an earthquake. An Omega princess, refusing a prestigious marriage, choosing exile over duty. It was unheard of, impossible, revolutionary. My father stared at the ring in my outstretched hand like it was a viper. You'll have nothing. The castle, your mother's inheritance. It all reverts to territorial control until you marry. The castle was my mother's, I said, my voice shaking now with fury instead of fear. Left to me in her will, held in trust but never yours to take. Check the documents, father. She made sure of that. Made sure that even if you tried to control me, I'd always have one place that was mine. I watched the realization dawn on his face, watched him remember the stipulations my mother had written into her will when I was just a child. The castle and its lands were mine, irrevocably, held in trust until my 25th birthday. I'd turned 26 4 months ago. It was mine, and there was nothing he could do about it. Fine. His voice was ice and ash. Keep your castle, but you are no daughter of mine. You are banished from Carter territory. Your name will be struck from our records, and if you ever return, you'll be arrested as a trespasser. He turned to the servants clustered in the hallway. Spread the word. Madison Carter no longer exists. She is dead to this family. He swept out, taking his fury and his broken dreams with him, and I stood in the wreckage of my old life feeling something I'd never felt before. Free. Terrifyingly, gloriously free. I had nothing now except my mother's castle, and the mate bond singing in my chest, but I was no longer property, no longer a pawn, no longer a pretty thing to be sold and used and discarded. Through the bond, I felt Blake's shock and pride and fierce approval. His mental voice whispered across the distance, I'm coming. Hold on, my mate. I'm coming. But he didn't need to come. Because I was already moving, already gathering the few possessions I cared about, my mother's jewelry, a few books, the simple dress I wore, and heading toward the stables. Charlotte appeared at my elbow, her face set with determination. I'm coming with you, my lady. I'll not leave you to face this alone. Charlotte, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Her voice was firm. You're the bravest woman I've ever known, and wherever you're going, I'm going too. So we fled together, 2 women on horseback riding through the dawn-lit forest toward my mother's castle, and with every mile that passed, I felt the weight lifting from my shoulders. The corset was gone. The expectations were gone. The future I'd been dreading was gone. All that remained was the present moment, and the impossible hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward that didn't require me to surrender my soul. We reached the castle by midday, a smaller holding than my father's estate, but beautiful in its simplicity, surrounded by woods, and built from gray stone that had weathered centuries of storms. My mother had loved this place, had spent her final years here when my father's castle became too suffocating. Now it was mine, and as I stood in the overgrown courtyard with Charlotte beside me, I felt my mother's presence like a blessing. "We're home," I whispered, and my wolf settled for the first time in weeks. The mate bond flared suddenly, urgently, and I turned toward the forest road just as 4 horses emerged from the trees. Blake rode in the lead, his face set with determination and something that looked like awe. Behind him came Rachel, her blonde hair streaming in the wind, her expression fierce and free. And beside her rode a beta man I'd never met, dark-haired, steady-eyed, watching Rachel with such undisguised love that it hurt to witness. James, her true mate. They dismounted in my courtyard, and Blake crossed to me in 3 long strides, his hands coming up to frame my face like I was something precious and impossible. "You did it. You refused him. Madison, you actually—" "I couldn't marry him." My voice broke on the words. "Not when I knew you existed. Not when every cell in my body screams that I'm yours. You are mine." His forehead pressed against mine, his scent wrapping around me like safety. "And I'm yours. And I don't care what it costs. I don't care what we have to sacrifice. We're ending this. Today." Rachel stepped forward, James at her side, their hands clasped tight. Blake made his announcement this morning, called a joint council session with both territories, and declared his true mate bond with you publicly. I pulled back to stare at Blake, my heart hammering. "You didn't. The consequences were exactly what we expected." Blake's smile was grim. "I lost everything. Titles, lands, position. The council voted to strip me of my lordship and exile me from Harrison territory. But I don't care, Madison. I'd do it 1,000 times over." "I confess too," Rachel added, her voice steady despite the emotion shining in her eyes. "Told them about James, about our mate bond, about 3 years of suffering in silence while we honored false vows. It caused quite a scene." James spoke for the first time, his voice deep and measured. "Understatement, my love. I thought Lord Montgomery was going to have an apoplectic fit. 2 broken marriages in 1 day, both for mate bonds. The councils are in chaos. They exiled all of us," Blake continued. "Rachel, James, me, we're outcasts now, homeless, powerless, with nothing but what we could carry." His eyes held mine. "Was it worth it? Losing everything for a mate bond they say doesn't matter?" I looked at the 4 of them, these impossibly brave people who had chosen truth over comfort, love over duty, and felt something fierce and bright ignite in my chest. Yes, it was worth it, and we're not homeless. I gestured to the castle behind me. "My mother left me this. It's not much, but it's ours. All of ours." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "You'd share your home with us? After everything? We're in this together now." I took Blake's hand, felt the mate bond surge with approval. The 4 of us against the world. So yes, welcome home. That night, we gathered in the castle's great hall, dusty and neglected but solid, and made our plans. Charlotte had managed to find some provisions in the kitchens, and we sat around the long table like conspirators, like revolutionaries, mapping out the impossible. "There's a legend," James said, his fingers tracing patterns on the table. "An old legend about the moon goddess and her original laws. Before the territories formed, before politics corrupted everything, there was a prophecy that when 4 souls brave enough to choose true love over false honor united, a new era of mate bonds would dawn." Blake leaned forward. "Where did you hear this?" "Ancient texts in the Harrison Library. I've been researching for 3 years, looking for any legal precedent to claim Rachel, and I found references to a moon priestess who lives in the deep forest. She's supposed to be the last keeper of the old ways, the true servant of the goddess." Rachel's eyes lit up. "If we could find her, if she could prove that our mate bonds are divinely ordained, it wouldn't matter to the councils," I interrupted gently. "They don't care about divine law, only their own power." "Then we don't go to the councils." Blake's voice was quiet but fierce. "We go to the people. We start our own community here, based on mate bonds and truth instead of political marriages and lies. And when others see what we're building, when other trapped wolves realize there's an alternative, they'll come." It was insane, impossible, revolutionary. And looking around the table at these 3 who had already sacrificed everything, I felt hope bloom like a flower in concrete. "Then we find the moon priestess, and we ask for her blessing. The journey to find her took 2 days of hard riding through forest that grew increasingly wild and ancient. James led us using old maps and older instincts, following a path that seemed to exist more in feeling than in physical reality. And on the second night, with the full moon rising huge and silver above the trees, we found her. The clearing appeared suddenly, as if the forest itself had decided to reveal its secret. A small cottage built from living trees, their branches woven together to form walls and roof, stood at the center. Herbs hung drying from every surface, and the air smelled of sage and moonflower and something indefinably sacred. An old woman sat on the cottage steps, her white hair flowing like water, her eyes ancient and knowing. "You're late," she said, her voice cracked with age but strong. "I've been waiting for you for 300 years. We dismounted in stunned silence. Rachel found her voice first. "You knew we were coming?" The moon goddess told me. The old woman, the priestess, stood, her movements fluid despite her apparent age. She told me that someday 4 souls would be brave enough to break the chains that bind us all, that an Omega princess would choose exile over false marriage, that an Alpha Lord would sacrifice his power for his true mate, that a lady would confess her forbidden love, that a Beta would stand proud beside his Omega. Her eyes moved over each of us in turn. "You are they, the ones foretold." Blake stepped forward, his hand finding mine. "The kiss, in the rose garden. Was that the goddess's doing?" "Yes." The priestess smiled, and it was beautiful and sad and timeless. "She arranged everything. The masquerade where masks hid identities, the moonlight that drew you both outside, the stumble that brought your lips together. She's been planning this for decades, waiting for 4 souls strong enough to change everything. But why?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why make it so hard? Why not just, because easy revolutions don't last?" The priestess gestured for us to follow her into the clearing. "Because you 4 needed to prove yourselves worthy, not through birthright or power, but through choice, through sacrifice, through the willingness to lose everything for what matters most." She led us to the center of the clearing, where 4 standing stones formed a circle beneath the full moon. Ancient runes covered their surfaces, glowing faintly silver in the moonlight. "Kneel," she commanded, her voice suddenly resonant with power, "and receive the blessing you've earned." We knelt, Blake and I on one side, Rachel and James on the other, and the priestess raised her hands to the moon. She spoke in a language I didn't know, but somehow understood, words that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my soul. The moonlight intensified, becoming almost solid, pouring down around us like liquid silver. And then she came. The moon goddess materialized in the center of the circle, formed from light and shadow and something beyond human comprehension. She was beautiful and terrible, ancient and young, a presence that made my wolf whimper and prostrate itself in awe. When she spoke, her voice was every woman who had ever loved and fought and chose herself. My children, my brave, foolish children. Her hand, was it even a hand, touched my head, and warmth flooded through me. "You have proven yourselves, not through obedience but through courage, not through power but through love. And now I give you my blessing and my burden." The warmth became heat, became fire, and I felt something changing inside me. My wolf, usually quiet and submissive as an Omega should be, suddenly surged forward with strength that stole my breath. Alpha strength, alpha power. But I didn't lose my Omega nature. It was still there, still part of me, now woven together with something new, something complete. "You are Omega Alpha," the goddess said, her voice filling my head, both soft and strong, gentle and fierce, balanced as all beings should be. "Use this gift wisely, my daughter. Lead with your heart, but protect with your strength." She moved to Blake, and I watched light pour into him. "You are Alpha who chose to serve rather than dominate. Let this blessing remind you that true power lies in partnership, not control." To Rachel, "You are Omega who hid her strength for too long. No more hiding. Shine, my daughter. Shine for all who need to see." To James, "You are Beta who loves without diminishing. Remember that the strongest bonds are those chosen freely, not those forced by biology or status." The goddess's presence intensified until the silver light was blinding. 4 souls, now blessed. 4 hearts, now bound not just to each other but to a purpose. You will build a new way. You will show the trapped in suffering that there is hope, that mate bonds matter, that love is stronger than law. But know this, the councils will not yield easily. You will face trials, hardships, moments when everything seems lost. She looked at me directly, and I felt her gaze pierce through every defense I had. You, especially, Madison, Omega Alpha, bridge between worlds. You will be called Queen, but you must earn that title through deeds, not birth. Are you ready? I thought of my mother's castle waiting behind us, of Charlotte's fierce loyalty, of the mate bond singing between Blake and me, of Rachel and James finally free to love each other, of all the wolves trapped in loveless marriages, suffering in silence, believing they had no choice. Yes, I said, my voice steady. I'm ready. The goddess smiled, and the world exploded into silver light. When I woke, dawn was breaking through the trees, and I was lying in Blake's arms, his body wrapped around mine protectively. Rachel and James were a few feet away, also just stirring, their hands still clasped even in sleep. The priestess sat nearby, watching us with satisfied eyes. The blessing is complete, she said. Now go, build your sanctuary, gather the lost, and when you're strong enough, change the laws that have imprisoned us all for too long. We rode back to my mother's castle in awed silence, each of us processing what had happened, the power now thrumming through our veins. And when we arrived, we found we weren't alone anymore. A dozen wolves waited in the courtyard, Omegas fleeing arranged marriages, a pair of bonded females holding hands nervously, a young alpha whose true mate was a servant he'd been forbidden to claim. Word had spread faster than seemed possible. About 4 exiles who had chosen love, about a castle that welcomed mate bonds regardless of rank or gender, about hope. We heard, one of the Omegas said hesitantly, a young woman with frightened eyes. We heard you defied your fathers, that you chose your mates over everything. Is it true? Can we really— Yes, I said, Blake's hand warm in mine. Yes, you can. Welcome home. Over the next weeks, more came. Dozens, then hundreds. We built houses from the forest wood, planted gardens, established a community based on principles that seemed revolutionary, but should have been obvious. Mate bonds were sacred. Love mattered. Every wolf had the right to choose their own path. Blake and I worked side by side, building and planning and leading, and I discovered something I'd never known about myself. I was good at this, at seeing what needed to be done and making it happen, at resolving conflicts and inspiring people, at being not a princess locked in a castle, but a queen building a kingdom from nothing. 1 month after we arrived, on another full moon, Blake and I finally completed our bond. Rachel and James had married the week before in a simple ceremony, the first true mate wedding in living memory, and now it was our turn. Not marriage in the legal sense because we rejected those laws, but claiming in the ancient way, the way the moon goddess intended. We stood alone in the moonlit forest, just us and the stars, and the weight of everything we'd survived to reach this moment. Blake's hands were gentle as he undressed me, reverent, like he still couldn't quite believe I was real. And when his lips found mine, the mate bond roared to life with an intensity that made our first kiss seem like a candle beside a wildfire. Mine, he growled against my mouth, his wolf so close to the surface his eyes flashed gold. My mate, my Madison, my everything. Yours, I agreed, my hands fisting in his hair, pulling him closer. Always yours. We came together under the ancient trees, skin against skin, heat and need, and something that transcended physical pleasure. When he bit down on my neck, marking me, claiming me, sealing the bond that the moon goddess herself had ordained, I felt the final piece of myself click into place. Complete, whole, home. I bit him in return, tasted his blood and his essence, and felt his wolf surrender to mine with a trust that stole my breath. We were Alpha and Omega, and everything in between, equal partners in a bond that would last until death and beyond. Afterward, we lay tangled together in the grass, his hand over my heart and mine over his, feeling the synchronized beating that proved we were one now in every way that mattered. I love you, he whispered against my hair. I know it's only been a month. I know it's insane, but I love you, Madison, not just because of the mate bond, but because of who you are, the woman who chose exile over false safety, the queen who builds kingdoms from hope. I love you too. I pressed my hand to his mark on my neck, feeling the bite tingle with residual magic. And it's not insane, it's destiny. We stayed there until dawn, and when we finally returned to the castle, we found Charlotte waiting with news. Riders came while you were gone. Messengers from both Carter and Harrison territories. They're begging for an audience. Both territories are collapsing. Economies failing. People fleeing. Chaos spreading. They need help. Blake and I looked at each other, and I saw my own thoughts reflected in his eyes. This was it. The moment we'd been building toward. The chance to change everything. "Send word," I said, my voice strong and sure. "We'll meet with them, but on our terms, in our territory. And if they want our help, they'll have to accept our conditions." Charlotte grinned. "What conditions, my lady?" I smiled, feeling my Omega Alpha power thrumming through my veins, feeling Blake's strength and Rachel's courage and James's wisdom all flowing through the bonds we'd forged. That mate bonds are sacred. That love matters more than law, and that anyone, Omega or Alpha, rich or poor, same gender or different, has the right to claim their true mate. No more political marriages, no more suffering in silence, no more cages. "That's revolution," Charlotte breathed. "Yes," I agreed. "Yes, it is." And as the sun rose over our new kingdom, I felt the future unfold before us like a map of infinite possibility. The councils would resist. The old ways would fight back. But we had already won the most important battle, the one for our own souls. Now we would win the war, not with violence but with truth, not with force, but with love, and the world would never be the same. Chapter 6 months after we claimed each other under the full moon, 6 months after building our sanctuary from nothing but hope and determination, the messengers came, 3 of them, riding hard through winter snow, their horses exhausted and their faces drawn with desperation. I watched them approach from the tower window of my mother's castle, our castle now, headquarters of a revolution that had grown beyond anything we'd imagined, and felt the weight of destiny settle over my shoulders like a cloak I'd been born to wear. Blake found me there, his arm sliding around my waist from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. The mate bond hummed contentedly between us, a constant golden warmth that had only grown stronger with time. "They're here," he said quietly. "From both territories, Carter and Harrison." "I know." I leaned back against his chest, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I can feel their desperation from here, their fear. Do we help them?" His voice was carefully neutral, but I felt his conflict through the bond. These were the territories that had exiled us, that had called our mate bonds abominations, that had tried to force us into loveless marriages to serve their political ambitions. Part of him, the wounded part that still carried the scars of rejection, wanted to turn them away, let them suffer the consequences of their choices. But I had become something more than that wounded Omega princess in the past 6 months. The moon goddess's blessing had transformed me in ways I was still discovering, and with that transformation came responsibility. Power without compassion was tyranny, and I refused to become what they had been. "We help them," I said firmly, "but on our terms. We don't go back to the old ways. We change everything, or we change nothing." Blake's arms tightened around me, and I felt his pride and love flow through the bond like warm honey. "That's my queen talking." I turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to trace the mark I'd left on his neck 6 months ago. It had healed to a beautiful silver scar, visible proof of our bond, and I never tired of looking at it. I'm not a queen yet, just a woman who got tired of being told what she couldn't be. "You're my queen." He pressed his forehead to mine, his dark eyes holding mine with an intensity that still stole my breath. "You've always been my queen, Madison. From that first moment in the rose garden when you looked at me like I was worth something more than my title." We stood there for a long moment, drawing strength from each other, before Rachel's voice called from below. "Madison, Blake, the messengers are in the Great Hall, and they brought someone you need to see." We descended the tower stairs hand in hand, our fingers intertwined, presenting a united front. The castle had been transformed in 6 months. What had been dusty and neglected was now warm and welcoming, filled with the wolves who had fled their old lives to build something new with us. Charlotte had become our household manager, organizing everything with fierce efficiency. Young Omegas who had escaped arranged marriages worked in the kitchens and gardens. Bonded pairs of all genders and ranks lived and worked side by side, proving every day that love mattered more than biology or status. The great hall was crowded, not just with the 3 messengers, but with dozens of our community members who had gathered to witness this moment. And in the center of it all, looking older and more broken than I'd ever seen him, stood my father. Lord William Carter met my eyes across the hall, and I watched something crumble in his expression. Regret, maybe, or just the recognition that he had lost everything that mattered while chasing power. "Madison," he said, his voice rough, "you look well." "I am well." I moved to stand beside the high table, Blake at my right hand, Rachel and James flanking us, the four of us together, as we'd been since the beginning. "I'm free, happy, loved, everything you tried to prevent me from being." He flinched, and I felt a savage satisfaction that I immediately regretted. This was my father, flawed, misguided, broken by a system that had twisted him into something cruel, but still my father, the man who had loved my mother once, the man who had held me as a child and told me stories about queens who ruled with wisdom and strength. "The territories are collapsing," he said bluntly, abandoning any pretense of diplomacy. "Carter and Harrison both. The moment you four left, everything started falling apart. Crops failing, trade routes breaking down, people fleeing. Without strong leadership, without unity, we're fracturing. Both councils sent me to beg, yes, beg, for your return." "And Duke Morrison?" I asked coldly. "The man you were so desperate to sell me to? What does he think of this?" My father's jaw tightened. "Dead. 3 weeks after you refused him. Heart failure, the healers said. But everyone knows it was rage and humiliation." "You dodged a bullet, Madison. I'm man enough to admit it now." I felt Blake's hand tighten on mine, felt his wolf satisfaction at the news. The Duke who had wanted to cage me was gone, and I was here, free and powerful, and exactly where I was meant to be. Sometimes the universe delivered justice when we least expected it. "We built something here," I said, gesturing to the wolves gathered around us. "A community based on truth, on mate bonds and chosen families and the radical idea that every wolf deserves to choose their own path. You want us to come back? Fine. But we're not restoring the old ways. We're replacing them." The second messenger, a Harrison Council member I vaguely recognized, stepped forward. "What are your terms?" Rachel moved to stand beside me, James at her side, their hands clasped. She looked like a different woman than the exhausted lady I'd met 6 months ago. Confident now, radiant, free. "Full legal recognition of mate bonds," she said clearly. "Any wolf who can prove a true mate connection has the right to dissolve previous political marriages and claim their mate, regardless of gender, rank, or territory." "That's insane," the Harrison Council member sputtered. "It would invalidate hundreds of marriages, create chaos." "It would create honesty," James interrupted, his beta voice calm but firm. "And yes, some marriages would end, but they were already dead, weren't they? Living lies, producing misery instead of children, weakening packs instead of strengthening them. How many alphas in your territory are trapped with the wrong partners? How many omegas are dying slowly in golden cages?" The messengers exchanged uncomfortable glances, and I knew James had struck a nerve, because the truth was undeniable. Mate bonds mattered. Wolves with true mates were stronger, happier, more stable. The political marriages that the councils had forced for generations had created a society of quiet suffering and barely concealed resentment. "There's more," Blake said, his alpha power filling the room. "The territories merge. Carter and Harrison become one kingdom, jointly ruled. No more petty border disputes. No more treating each other as rivals instead of allies." "And who rules this merged kingdom?" my father asked, though I could see in his eyes that he already knew the answer. "We do." I met his gaze steadily. "The 4 of us. A council of true mates, balanced between Omega and Alpha, male and female, born nobility and chosen loyalty. We rule together, or we don't rule at all." The third messenger, an elderly Carter Council member I remembered from my childhood, shook his head slowly. "The people will never accept an Omega Queen. It goes against everything. I'm not just an Omega anymore." I let the power the moon goddess had given me rise to the surface, felt my wolf emerge with a strength that made several wolves in the room take an involuntary step back. I'm Omega Alpha, both soft and strong, compassionate and fierce. And if that's too complicated for your councils to understand, then maybe it's time for new councils. The great hall erupted, some wolves cheering, others arguing, everyone talking at once. But my father just stood there, staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "You've changed," he said finally. "You're not the girl I tried to control anymore." "No," I agreed. "I'm the woman you tried to destroy, and I survived anyway. The question is, can you change too? Can you let go of the old ways and embrace what we're building here? Or are you so wedded to tradition that you'd rather watch both territories burn. He was silent for a long moment, and I watched the war play out across his face. Pride versus practicality, tradition versus survival, the man he had been versus the man he could still become. Finally, he lowered his head. Not quite submission, but acknowledgement. I'll take your terms to the councils, but I can't promise they'll accept. Then we'll speak to the councils ourselves. Blake's voice was hard. Tomorrow, joint session, both territories, and we'll let the people decide. Not the old lords clinging to power, but the wolves who are actually suffering under your laws. The messengers left, and the hall slowly emptied until it was just the four of us and Charlotte, who had been watching from the doorway with tears streaming down her face. "You were magnificent, my lady," she said. "All of you. If I didn't already believe in the moon goddess, I would after watching you stand up to them like that." Rachel laughed, the sound bright and free. "We haven't won yet, Charlotte. They could reject everything, declare us traitors, try to arrest us. Then we'll fight," I said simply. "Not with violence if we can avoid it, but we'll fight, because too many wolves are counting on us now. Too many people have fled to us seeking freedom. We can't let them down." That night, lying in Blake's arms in the bed we'd shared for 6 months, I felt the enormousness of what we were attempting settle over me. "What if we fail?" I whispered into the darkness. "What if the councils reject everything, and we've given all these people false hope?" Blake's hand found mine, brought it to his lips. "Then we fail having tried, having fought for what's right instead of what's easy. But Madison, we won't fail, because we're not asking for permission anymore. We're claiming what the moon goddess already gave us, our mates, our freedom, our right to build something better." "When did you become so wise?" I teased gently. "When I found you." His voice was serious. "When I realized that real strength isn't about dominating others. It's about standing beside your equal and building something neither of you could create alone." The next morning, we rode to the boundary between Carter and Harrison territories, where a massive gathering had been organized. Thousands of wolves had assembled, not just council members but common people, farmers and traders, servants and soldiers, omegas and alphas and betas all mixed together, all waiting to hear what we had to say. A platform had been erected, and as the four of us climbed onto it, I felt the weight of every eye upon us. My father stood with the Carter Council on one side, the Harrison leadership on the other, and between them, stretching as far as I could see, the people who would actually have to live with whatever decision was made today. I stepped forward, and the crowd fell silent. For just a moment, I was that terrified princess again, locked in her chambers, wearing a corset that stole her breath. Then Blake's hand found the small of my back. Rachel moved to stand at my right, James at my left, and I remembered who I had become. 6 months ago, I began, my voice carrying across the massive crowd. I was told I had no choice, that I had to marry a man I didn't love to serve political ambitions I didn't share, and I refused. I walked away from my title, my inheritance, everything I'd been raised to value, because I learned something that the councils don't want you to know. Your choices matter. Your happiness matters. Your mate bonds matter. I gestured to Blake. This man is my true mate, chosen by the moon goddess herself, and he was married to someone else, not because they loved each other, but because their fathers thought it would bring peace. But there is no peace in loveless marriages, only slow death and quiet suffering. Rachel stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "I am Blake's ex-wife, and I am James's true mate. For 3 years I lived a lie, honoring vows that meant nothing while my soul screamed for the man standing beside me. The councils called our mate bond a scandal, an abomination, something to be hidden and denied. But I'm done hiding. James is my mate, my partner, my choice, and I would rather die in exile with him than live one more day pretending." James spoke next, his beta voice carrying unexpected authority. "I have no title, no lands, no power except what I've earned through loyalty and hard work. By traditional standards, I'm nobody, but I am Rachel's mate, and that makes me somebody. Because mate bonds don't care about rank or status or bloodline. They care about souls recognizing each other. And isn't that worth more than all the political alliances in the world?" Blake's turn. "I was an alpha lord. I had everything your councils value: power, territory, a prestigious marriage. And I was miserable. Half a man living half a life, going through the motions of duty while my soul withered. Then I found Madison, my true mate, and suddenly I understood what I'd been missing. Partnership, real partnership, where we challenge each other and support each other and build something together that neither of us could create alone. I gave up my titles to claim her, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat, because being Madison's mate matters more than being anybody's lord. I looked out over the sea of faces, some skeptical, some hopeful, some openly crying. The councils will tell you that tradition matters, that stability requires sacrifice, that mate bonds are rare and probably mythical and definitely not worth disrupting the political order. But we're living proof that they're wrong. Mate bonds are real, they're powerful, and they're the moon goddess's greatest gift to us. I let my Omega Alpha power rise, let them see what I had become. I'm not asking the councils for permission. I'm asking you, all of you, the wolves who are actually living with the consequences of their laws. Do you want to keep sacrificing your happiness for their politics? Do you want to keep forcing your children into loveless marriages? Or are you ready for something new, something better, something true? The silence that followed was deafening. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a young Omega woman raised her hand. "I have a mate," she called out, her voice shaking. "A beta from another territory. We've been meeting in secret for 2 years because my father won't allow the marriage. He says I need to bond with an alpha to strengthen the pack. But I love him, and he loves me, and I'm tired of hiding." Another voice, from the other side, an older alpha man. "My mate died 15 years ago. My wolf has been mourning ever since. But the council forced me to remarry for political reasons. My second wife and I. We care for each other, but it's not the same. It's not real, and we're both suffering for it." More voices, more confessions, more wolves standing up and speaking their truths, emboldened by our example. I watched the council members' faces pale as they realized they were losing control of the narrative, that this wasn't about politics anymore. It was about people, real people with real pain, demanding real change. My father stepped forward, and the crowd fell silent again. "This is chaos," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "If we start allowing wolves to dissolve marriages based on mate bonds, where does it end? How do we maintain order?" "You maintain order by serving the people instead of controlling them," I shot back. "By recognizing that strong communities are built on authentic connections, not forced compliance. By trusting that the moon goddess knows better than any council what bonds will create stability and strength." "And if we refuse?" The Harrison Council leader's voice was sharp. "If we reject your demands?" Blake's smile was cold. "Then we stop helping. The territories continue to collapse, and when desperate wolves come to us seeking refuge, we'll welcome them. One by one, we'll drain your territories of everyone who values freedom over tradition, and you'll rule over empty lands and abandoned castles, kings of nothing." The threat hung in the air, but it wasn't an empty threat. Wolves had been fleeing to us for months, and everyone knew it. The council's power was built on people's compliance. Without people, they had nothing. "Vote," I commanded, my Omega Alpha voice carrying authority that surprised even me. "Right now, in front of everyone. Do we change the laws, or do we watch the territories die?" The councils had no choice. They called the vote, and I watched centuries of tradition crumble in minutes. Not unanimous. Several old lords voted against, clinging to power until the bitter end. But the majority voted yes. Mate bonds would be legally recognized. Political marriages could be dissolved. The territories would merge under joint rule. And I, Omega Princess, Exile, Revolutionary, would be crowned Omega Alpha Queen. The coronation happened 3 weeks later, in a ceremony that broke every tradition while honoring the only one that truly mattered. The Moon Priestess herself performed it, emerging from her forest sanctuary to bless our new kingdom. I wore white, not the elaborate gowns of traditional queens, but a simple dress that let me breathe, let me move, let me be myself. Blake stood beside me in matching white, and when the priestess placed twin crowns on our heads, I felt the weight of responsibility settle alongside the weight of destiny. "You are king and queen of the Carter Harrison kingdom," the priestess proclaimed, her ancient voice carrying to every corner of the massive crowd. "But more than that, you are partners, equals, proof that the moon goddess's blessings flow to those brave enough to claim them. Rule with wisdom, lead with compassion, and never forget the price you paid to stand here." Rachel and James knelt before us, not in submission, but in partnership. "We are your council," Rachel said clearly, "your advisors, your friends, and we'll help you build a kingdom where every wolf has the freedom we fought for." The celebration lasted 3 days. Wolves from both territories and beyond came to witness the coronation, to register their mate bonds officially, to dissolve loveless marriages and claim true partners. The mate bond registry that Rachel and James established was swamped with requests. Dozens of couples coming forward, some who had been hiding their connections for years, others who had only just discovered each other. Every one of them proof that we'd been right. That mate bonds mattered. That love was stronger than law. 6 months after the coronation, I stood on the balcony of the castle, no longer my mother's castle, but the seat of our new kingdom, and watched the sun rise over lands that were finally at peace. My hand rested on my swollen belly, feeling the flutter of movement there. Twins, the healers said. 1 alpha, 1 omega. Balanced, like their parents, like this new world we were building. Blake's arms came around me from behind, his hands covering mine over our children. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. "That we did it." My voice was thick with emotion. Against every odd, despite every obstacle, we actually changed the world. "You changed the world," he corrected gently. "You, who refused to accept the cage they tried to build around you. You, who chose freedom even when it cost everything. You, who became Omega Alpha Queen not because you were born to it, but because you were brave enough to claim it." I leaned back against him, drawing strength from his steady presence. Below us, the kingdom was waking. Farmers heading to fields they now owned instead of worked as servants. Bonded pairs walking hand in hand without fear of judgment. Children playing in streets that no longer echoed with the tension of territories on the brink of war. They said Omegas were meant to submit. I said quietly, that we were too soft, too emotional, too weak to lead. But I learned something these past months. We're not meant to submit. We're meant to transform, to take all that compassion and empathy and emotional intelligence and use it to build something better than what came before. And sometimes, Blake added, his voice warm with love and pride, 1 accidental kiss can change the world. I turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to trace the mark on his neck. My mark, claiming him as mine. It wasn't an accident. The moon goddess knew exactly what she was doing when she brought us together. She knew we'd be brave enough, strong enough, stubborn enough to see it through. She chose well then. He pressed his forehead to mine, and through the mate bond, I felt everything he was feeling. Love so deep it had no bottom, pride that stole his breath, and underneath it all, wonder that this impossible thing had become real, that we had become this. Rachel and James joined us on the balcony, their own happiness radiating like sunlight. "The morning reports are in," Rachel said, though her smile suggested the news was good. 3 more territories are requesting information about our mate bond laws. They want to implement similar systems. "The revolution is spreading," James added, his arm around Rachel's waist, their bond as visible and beautiful as ours. "You 4 started something that can't be stopped now. A movement. A change in consciousness. The old ways are dying, and the new ways, your ways, are taking root." I looked at the 3 people who had become my family, my co-rulers, my proof that chosen family mattered more than blood. We had been 4 strangers brought together by impossible circumstances. Now we were architects of a new world, builders of a kingdom based on truth and love, and the radical belief that every wolf deserved to choose their own destiny. "What do you think our children will say about us?" I asked softly, my hand on my belly. "When they're old enough to understand what we did?" Blake's smile was brilliant. "I think they'll say their parents were crazy enough to believe that love could change laws, brave enough to sacrifice everything for truth, and strong enough to build a kingdom on hope instead of fear." "I think," Rachel said quietly, her own hand resting on her still flat stomach, early pregnancy that she and James hadn't announced yet, but that I could sense through the bond we shared. "They'll say their parents taught them that being true to yourself is more important than being perfect for others. That standing up for what's right matters more than staying comfortable in what's wrong. And I think," James finished, his voice warm, "they'll say their parents proved that ordinary wolves can do extraordinary things when they're brave enough to try." We stood together on that balcony as the sun climbed higher, 4 souls who had found each other in darkness and built something luminous. Below us, the kingdom we'd created from nothing but courage and love began another day. And in the distance, I could see wolves traveling toward us. More refugees, more seekers, more people desperate for the freedom we offered. The moon goddess had given me an impossible mate, a forbidden love, a destiny that required me to lose everything to gain what truly mattered. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Because this, standing here with Blake's arms around me and our children growing inside me, Rachel and James beside us as partners and friends, a kingdom built on truth spreading before us, this was worth every sacrifice, every fear, every moment of doubt. I had been an Omega princess locked in a cage, then an exile with nothing but hope. Now I was an Omega Alpha Queen building a world where no wolf would ever have to choose between duty and destiny again. And as the sun rose fully over our united kingdom, I felt the moon goddess's approval like a benediction. We had done what she asked, proven ourselves worthy, changed the world. Now we would teach our children to do the same, to question unjust laws, to honor true bonds over false traditions, to believe that love, real, chosen, true love, was always worth fighting for. The old world had died the night Blake and I kissed in that rose garden. A new world had been born in its place. And as I stood there surrounded by the people I loved most, feeling new life flutter inside me, I knew with absolute certainty that this was just the beginning. Our revolution would continue. Our legacy would grow. And someday, wolves everywhere would look back on this moment and remember 4 souls, brave enough to choose love over law, 4 hearts, strong enough to change everything. And they would know that impossible things are only impossible until someone is crazy enough to try.